strong awareness of that kind of stuff just goes out there and always the doing coming, getting in the way and becoming in a full circle and agitation. And realizing that actually punctuation is far more important than I realize. And getting seeing the value. But for actually doing it, it's becoming a challenge. So being still.
You see, if you establish a form, it makes it difficult to have contact that is unwholesome. You can still do it, obviously, people do, but it has to sort of slip under the wire rather than overtly be what the way that you relate to somebody is sort of snappish or needy or chummy. Every time I related to my teacher, he would look to see where I was coming from. You sort of get the feeling that you're being a bit sort of persecuted because it's sort of like that to see where you're at before he connects. It's a form. It's an expectation of standards. Whether it was in a teaching situation or whether it was playing some sort of game together or going driving, you'd feel that observation, that sense of being watched and seen, and the sense of the relationship, including an awareness of where you're coming from. Which is, it's easy. Once you get used to it, it's just getting used to it, isn't it? Yes.
It's like you see people by the road and you walk by and
yeah. Yeah.
But I did notice that Bruce, in communicating, there was clear value at the beginning that I actually forgot at the end.
Right.
But I've noticed that work has the feeling maybe not bound to begin with, there's definitely the wanting about at the end. Or there's a barrier as well of that.
So why is it not happening at the beginning? There's something else happening.
I think again there's appreciation of what's
I think that may be the case, that one establishes that I'm going to bring quality to this rather than there was quality in that. It's a sort of commitment. Right? Formalise it. If you do it physically, all of this stuff can be so intellectual. You don't actually know until you do it whether you've just all mouth or whether there's actually trousers involved. So intend to do it, establish that you intend to do it. If you don't do it, you're not doing it. It's essentially the truth of it. Theorising that you wish that you could bring, everybody says, I'm really looking forward to bringing quality to when I next see my mum. And gone, just didn't happen. By bowing, you express a willingness to put down your ego, put it aside, in order that quality can come to the next thing. And a physical act of doing it is a physical commitment towards that end, which is much more real than I wish to bring quality to what I'm going to do. Doesn't make any difference. I've seen too many wishes. Some people want to wish to pick up their cushion but never do. This remains there gathering dust. In essence, that's what happens to many people's practice, that sort of gathers dust in their everyday life. Because there is a very strong, willful identity that is, it's inconvenient to that identity to have quality come to bear in that situation. They may be faced with a change of status, or an attitude might appear about somebody, or they may not be able to maintain control of a situation if they don't. I'm going to show my revulsion at you in order that you remain under my control. There's all sorts of games that we play that would be disempowered if we bowed and let go and met the situation with real awareness and a real empty mind, rather than we want to control life, we want to maintain the status quo. We are afraid of what will happen if we don't. And to get past that, we have to formalise the bow as a practice that makes it very clear to ourselves where we're coming from, and hopefully to other people, that we intend this to be a conversation or an event which is of quality and not just of the old mix, whatever that is. Mm.
It's quite sudden as well, it's inside or didn't venture.
It's one of many tools. The bow is a tool that you can bring to punctuate and to commit to a certain quality. That's why it's very important that as you come out of the bow, you finish in the belly and not just sort of leaning forward still in a sort of half left over bow. But also, any sort of device you use, like naming is a device. It is a device in order to remind you of the simplicity of what's going on. Just to be aware that we are just meeting. No. That's what's happening. That's all that's happening. We're just sitting. Just drinking tea, just breathing. That is what's happening. And if we're aware that that's going on, we won't get lost in all the fantasy and the whipped up mind that occurs often with words. But the naming brings us back to, reminds us of what the actual experience is that's going on right now. This is what's happening right now. So valuable. That you do things on an out-breath is so valuable. Because every time you commit to doing things on an out-breath, you're committing to letting go of identity, letting go of ego in the action. Because ego identity is built up on the in-breath and released on the out-breath. And so these simple commitments, once you apply yourself to one of them, the others sort of shoot in. If they're in there, if the training's in there, undulate, and you'll immediately be aware of the out-breath, and that you're standing. They trigger all the other skills to become available. It doesn't mean that you're going to use them. That's your business. That's a choice you'll make. It can only be made out of habit. And obviously, if you haven't got the skills, you can't. Somebody who has not practiced bare attention will not be able to bring bare attention in, even though they've done a lot of bowing. So lots of sort of Buddhists out there that have done loads of bowing and have no understanding at all of bare attention or the out-breath. But they do have that one skill, it starts off something with sincerity perhaps, to some degree, and to some degree there'll be an out-breath involved, or there's probably an in-breath on the way up. What clearly needs to be worked on is that it's inappropriate that you can go through 3 or 4 hours of doing something and feel miserable at your behaviour because there was a complete lack of skill. That's becoming less and less acceptable, and that you have to apply yourself to those areas of your life where previously you have allowed tightness or control or neediness to just full reign.
And I made a list. The list was what worked at once. And the first thing I wrote was the out-breath, and just the out-breath, naming, stretching, sitting, gaps, all these things I've got.
If you put one in place, the others will follow.
Yeah.
If it's that first step, the first step of putting it in place, something that you can do at any moment, rather than something that is special, specialised, like sort of morning. You can't every 5 seconds go out and do the cold water splash. But there are things that you can do all the time, where you can, whilst you're in the middle of something, actually emphasise that you're doing things on the out-breath and prevent yourself from doing things on the in-breath. That, for instance, is when you're in the situation, you can see that it's all, going end up. At that point, then you can say, right, I'm going to add more structure here. More of the skills that I have at my disposal need to come into this. And you need to do this. It's very useful to say, right, 6 hours of every day I expect myself to bring quality to. And like work or relationships or whatever. And this is the action plan that I'm going to have. You do teaching plans. Why don't you do a life plan? And actually ask yourself, have I done that? Did I get that? Did I do these things that I said I was going to do? And if I didn't, how am I going to remind myself tomorrow and do it again and again and again until you start to see some result? And you will see result. What isn't acceptable is, I can't do this. And then just not bother.
I don't feel that's where I'm at, or that's what I thought. I feel that there's been an awareness. Hang on a minute.
Yeah. And that is constructive. That you should feel, I am learning. I'm learning how to do this. It's going to take a while, but I am actually in the process. It is actually happening. It's not going to happen just because you do half an hour's exercise in the morning. And it's an isolated event, and it won't connect because you've got much stronger rituals and habits that will just knock it out of the ring because it's not strong enough. You have to work at it. You have to put the time in. It has to be conscious. You have to put it at the forefront of mind. You have to patana it.
That's why it's so
because it makes you face these things that you know it's going to be a priority here, and you're going to be challenged about what you've done in the last couple of days. Because who you are, what it is, the what that arrives at the door is the result of what you've done in the last couple of days. It's about replacing frittering away your time with how do we get to grips with applying ourselves to the essential practice rather than getting watered down form of practice that doesn't really go into our lives at all.
Yeah, but priority for me at the moment is keeping moving and bringing, especially at work, teaching.
You see, you're good at this. You may not think you're good at this, but some people just think, oh, wing it. Oh, that'll be all right. And it isn't. Maybe say, oh, it'll be all right, and it is. Maybe that's all you need to do. But if it didn't work, and it hasn't worked, and if it hasn't worked for several years, you need to put some structure, you need to do a lesson plan. You need to learn, you need to make the lesson plan, stick to it. Halfway through the party, ask yourself, have I gone off into a room to be silent for 5 minutes? And then you go and do that. You write a list of things you think would be valuable at a party, and do it. And see whether, why not? What's wrong with you? What makes you think you should be able to do it au naturel when it's hard? It's a hard thing, this. It's really hard. It requires management.
I'm not saying there's not quality, because there is. But there needs to be more pausing, more.
I'm working on it. I'm looking forward to feedback. I'm expecting feedback on it. I'm expecting feedback. You should make a sort of a lesson plan up for part of your day, every day, a different bit. Sometimes you can do the same bit, but don't stick to just one thing. Try all sorts of things. Going to work, going out with your mates, down the pub. How do I do that with real quality? How do I relax, have time off, have a holiday, have a break, and maintain quality? Or is, got to actually be sort of joyful and content now. It's supposed to be a break. Going on holiday. How can I possibly not be miserable, frustrated, needy, anxious about the whole thing going well? How can I possibly be joyful as a host when these people come to my party and not, get involved in being on a forward circle for them? It makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you want to be clear and bright and joyful and content, but you think it should be that there is some divine being that says, oh, you do, oh, here you are, it's going to happen to you, like a sort of a lottery thing. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to put the hours in.
You said recently that
Hmm?
you said recently being a meditator is harder than something like that being an Olympic.
I think so. I do truly believe it's easier to be a national champion at sport because you've got all the support. All you need is a bit of flair. We know that everybody in the room has got flair, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But you've got this feeling, oh, it should just happen to me. Why isn't it happening to me? Because you're not bloody bothering. That's why it's not happening to you. And you can stay in that state of sort of hoping that Jesus or the Buddha's going to sort of lump a present on your doorstep. It's not going to happen. You are expected to do the work. That is not what devotion is. Devotion is not saying, bring it on. I think the thing that feeds it, in terms of faith, is that 9 times out of 10 when you practice for a reasonable length of time, you feel better afterwards. Okay. Okay. And you're putting the work in. Jolly good. And so does Natalie. But there are specific areas where it does go tits up. And where, obviously, that's an area where something isn't working. What? Somewhere there's something which is where you are refusing to bow. Something isn't bending in identity. It could be to do with, I want to control a situation. It could be to do with status. I want to have the same sense of who I am in relation to things. It can be to do with money and sense of security, that things are, I'm going to have I'm going to have what I need. Something gives you the feeling that I'm going to just duck under this in order to get what I want, and I will use. You reckon? Well, at that point, if you know that you're doing that, you apply the skills that you have. You establish the skills. One thing you know is those skills don't just offer themselves up to you immediately. It's almost like you forget that you have skills at that point. So what you have to do is establish before you go into that situation that you are going to have those skills working at the beginning. You're going to initiate that event. Okay. It's as simple as every morning I have an alarm clock that goes off in order that I can know what time it is to sit. It's just like an emergency measure. And more often than not, I'm actually awake before the alarm goes off. But it's there saying, if at the last resort you're still unconscious, this noise will remind you how to behave, that you have to get up and do things. And that, I think, is something you can put in place, a little hurdle that says, I'm going to wear an armband, and on it, tonight when I go to the party or when I go to work, I'm going to wear something that says, stop, or backward circle, or bow. At each corner of an activity, I'm going to bow. So that you establish a form, you put in place these little habits, rituals that lead to quality, rather than the rituals you have that lead to the stuff that isn't working. You have to plan them. As I say, literally put it in your diary and make a point of looking at your diary before you begin the activity and after the activity and say, did I do those 4 points? A bit like a PowerPoint presentation. There are the 4 bullet points. And those are the 4 bullet points I'm going to hit today. By hook or crook, I am going to hit those 4 bullet points. And I have it in my hand. You go into the room with it in your hand. At the end, you look at it and you recognise I hit 2 of them, and 2 completely went out the window. So tomorrow I'm going to hit those 2 first, and you take a piece of paper tomorrow. So something that prevents you from forgetting and ignoring what's going on. What comes from this is establishing good habits, helpful habits, and which will replace the older habits. And it also gives you insight into, as for instance the exercising, having to bow before and after at the beginning and end of a conversation. You begin to realise how irritating it is, because you can't have your chitty-chatty moment. And you've built up an identity based on chit-chat. You're going to be bowing, you've been like a Bobby donkey. And so it reveals stuff to you about yourself, and that you're going to change that behaviour, because it's just too tiring. You've actually got to bring quality to every conversation, every little comment that you make, creating some structure. And also, it's worth saying to people, what sort of structures do you use? How did you get to feel, how did you cope with your home situation? How is it that Nat feels her practice at home is fine? What's making that work for her then? What's she done? Couldn't have been just it wasn't just grace. It must have been something she did. So what was it? Ask her. How did you get from A to B? And these things will work. These things are what we need to practice. It's the one area where where there seem to be many banana skins. And it may be that the bit that's working for you is of great help to somebody else. And so you can recognise, this is what I did, and this is the shift I made, and that may work for them, may not. Not everything works for everybody. But something's going to click, and you're making the effort to find those things, those devices. And bowing is one of them.